Happy Sunday, everyone. It's not going to go well if you mispronounce the first word in your recording, but it's only going to go up from here. Hope you're all having a great Sabbath. This one's going to be on the shorter side. I wanted to talk about something that I was thinking about this week. I was in California, Palm Springs, then La Jolla for the week for a couple different events, and had some interesting conversations that led me to think about this idea that this juxtaposition between the Prince of Peace on the one hand and this creation of contention and conflict on the other side. I've always found it interesting that, we call Jesus the Prince of Peace, and, yet he was creating a scourge and whipping, these money changers in the temple and upending their tables and kicking them out, right? And so it's kind of interesting, like Jesus is often painted as this docile, passive type of person, but that's not always the way he acted. And so how do you reconcile those, and what does it mean to advance peace when you see something that's wrong, as was, polluting the temple in that case with these worldly things, with mammon? And so is it consistent to pursue peace when you are yourself kind of creating an altercation that's going to upset a lot of people? So I had some conversations that this week where individuals were sharing some experiences about how some of their family members were struggling with the gospel, or that there was kind of division in their family in terms of this difference of opinion, and the challenge that led to have, people where the whole family used to be members of the church and now only some are, or one individual joined the church, the first one in their family, and no one else in their family is, and the implications of that, like they can't go to their temple marriage, or they're being told that their religion is not true, and things like this. So there's this scripture in Matthew 10 that's going to be familiar to you, but this is the one that was on my mind as I was thinking about these stories, where it says, this is Jesus talking, he says, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes shall be they of his own household." That's really interesting, right? Because here's Christ saying, don't think that I'm come to bring peace. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. So how is it that the Prince of Peace, who talks about, giving people peace, and peace which surpasseth all understanding, and, not as the world give I unto you, and so forth. Like, here's the individual that we consider the Prince of Peace, who talks about being able to give us peace, and yet he's saying, this is interesting because he didn't come to send peace, but a sword. And so those of us who are Christian, those of us who are following Christ, that I think the implication is that if we are following Christ and doing as he wants us to do, that we're going to alienate people. And they could be people even within our own family, but that alienation is an inherent part of choosing Christ. If we are going to be disciples, then we are going to walk down a path that other people are going to disagree with, and they can even be in our own family. And so choosing Christ, in a sense, as I titled this, creates contention, because our action of choosing to follow God is disagreed with by many other people. And many of those other people do not like the choice that we make. All throughout the Old Testament, which we're reading this year, there are countless examples of how the prophets are being stoned by the people and by the kings and these leaders, because it's not enough to have this polite difference of opinion. It's that these individuals cannot abide someone telling them that they're wrong. And so they try and kill them. They try and make them go away. There's the scripture in Mark 5:17, where it says that the people prayed Jesus, or basically requested Jesus, to depart out of their coasts. like don't come here. We don't want you. No, don't come and, lift up the rock and see the critters that are, growing in the shadow. And so the natural inclination to be content with the status quo and not want to be probed at and to have to change. And so all throughout the scriptures, we see these examples where people are doing wickedly and they revile against the prophets, which is ironic because these are the individuals who the Lord has sent specifically to get those people on the right path, to call out their wickedness, to get them to stop, to turn to God, etc. And yet, rather than listening to them, they're stoning them, they're running them out of town because they don't want to listen to this individual who's telling them that what they're doing is wrong. In John 7:43, it says that there were these people who were seeing Jesus and they're like, oh my gosh, this guy's the Messiah. Surely he's the Christ. And then there were people who disagreed. And so they're having this debate. Is this guy the long-awaited Messiah? And it says in John 7:43, there was a division among the people because of him. And so we like to think that, choosing Christ means rainbows and puppies and lollipops and unicorns and, he's the Prince of Peace and everything will be great. When in reality, it's the opposite. That choosing Christ means that for everyone who doesn't choose Christ, there's going to be disagreement and potentially conflict, because not only do they just disagree with the choice, they think it's wrong. And they don't like the implications of that choice because it means that the ones who didn't choose to follow Christ, are wrong. And people in that circumstance don't like being told that they're wrong. I think of, as a missionary, and certainly I've had experiences since, where people really struggle with the idea that there's this one true church, that there's a restored gospel, that there's priesthood authority, because the implication is that everyone else is wrong, right? Like if I'm not on your team, you're saying I'm inherently on the wrong team. And that's not, for people who are on the other team, they don't like being told that. No one likes to be told that they're wrong. So you get this very accommodating approach to religion in the modern context where it's like, you do you, right? Whatever's good for you. You choose whatever's right for you. It's this very relative morality where people make their own choices about what they think is right and true, rather than any type of absolute standard that we can attain to, because that absolute standard, meaning that there is a God, that he speaks to prophets, that he's chosen certain prophets, that he's restored his priesthood, all these truth claims that follow, if they are true, then it means the others are false. And so those people don't like that. So you've had these conversations or heard of them where people revile against the church, against Christ, against missionaries, against you, against me, because they don't like the implication that they have made a wrong choice. And so that creates, as it says in John 7, division among the people. By some people choosing Christ, by some people on the straight and narrow, all the other people in the, great and spacious building and in the midst of darkness and following all these other paths, right? They feel judged. They feel like, oh, you're holier than that. Oh, you think that that's the one true path. Look, my life is good. Things are fine, whatever. Who are you to judge me? Who are you to say that you're right and I'm wrong? Right? And we see that all the time today, where the faithful followers who are trying to follow Jesus, especially if they're just like focused on themselves and trying to be humble followers of Christ, that simple act of being a disciple is perceived by so many other people as contentious. It invites contention because they want to revile against those who, by their choice, are implying that others have chosen wrongly. So it's really interesting to think about, here's Jesus saying, I've come to send a sword to set family members against one another. Your foes will be those of your own household. And we like to think like, oh, everyone in my family were members of the church or whatever, right? Like, no big deal. But no, right? Because like some of you will be making different choices. I choose, for example, if I were to choose to keep the Sabbath day holy and really try and make it a holy day, then if I've got family members who, are watching Sunday night football or whatever, then they may perceive that they may feel judged. They may feel that there's a disagreement there. That may create contention, where one individual thinks that pursuing a holy day and choosing Christ has implications of how we should behave. And then those in the very same family, I'm not speaking from any experience at all, who choose to act differently, right? That may create a little contention. I think of, like was it last week? I think I talked about idolatry and what is modern idolatry. Who are our idols? If you didn't listen to that, you should go back and listen. And so if I am trying to rid myself, for example, or you, if one of us are trying to rid ourselves of idolatry and identifying the things that are our modern idols, then what does it mean to those in our family or friends or acquaintances who are, quote unquote, worshiping those same idols, who perceive that they can be Mormon or Christian or a good person or whatever and still keep their summer cottage in Babylon, as Neil A. Maxwell said, right? But then for others who are trying to eschew those idols, who perceive that those idols are, or those things are idols, right? They feel judged, or they feel that that person is, being a goody two-shoes or a holier than thou, whatever. And so it creates contention when you have some individuals who are making choices where the implication is that others making that choice or those choices are doing the wrong thing. There may be a family member who wants to pay tithing and another one who doesn't. A big thing right now is all this LGBT stuff, where people are, I'll call it, reviling against the proclamation and, traditional gender roles and God creating male and female and all these things. And so now you've got family members where, some kids are now coming out as gay, or they think they're trans or whatever. And that's creating a lot of contention, because individuals who say, no, I don't think that we can, that God's doctrine on gender is going to change for so-called gender fluid people or whatever. There are individuals who hold a certain view of the gospel and of the implications of gender in a premortal, mortal, and postmortal context. And then there are others who think that God needs to adjust to the changing sociocultural landscape, where, all of a sudden it's cool to be, LGBTQIA plus triple Q, whatever, I don't know what everything else is, but you've got these cultural forces that are creating, in some cases at least, choices where they're making those choices because of the influence of their peers, and they're wanting, as throughout history we see throughout the scriptures, people wanting a God that will accommodate and agree with their choices rather than conforming their choices to what God's standard is. And so certainly within families right now, you have a lot of contention when people are coming to different conclusions on those types of gender issues. That's a big one, I think, right now. I think of, I don't know, even like someone joining the church and they're getting married in the temple, but their family members, can't go to the celestial room or whatever, or those who are wayward, the black sheeps of our families, or people making different choices. And again, they feel judged. They feel like others who are trying to follow what God has said are unfairly judging them, and that can create contention as well. So obviously, there are ways to deal with this. There are ways to show an outpouring of love despite having a difference of opinion on matters of doctrine or whatever, but easier said than done, because a lot of times the other individuals who are making, shall we say, alternative life choices or have differences of opinion on religious issues, even though, those outward actions of love or those expressions of love are being offered, they're not always welcomed, because some people really struggle that if you don't agree with me, right, then you're dead to me, or, I don't think you love me if you can't agree with me. And so a lot of people are drawing hard lines in the sand and shutting off family members, cutting them off if they don't agree with them, if they don't quote unquote support them and their lifestyle, whatever that may be. And so again, like if we claim to have discovered and followed truth, there is this sense in which we are implicitly claiming that others don't have that truth, that they're wrong, that they're on the wrong path. Now, we can do that in a very prideful way, obviously, and that's not effective and not proper or whatever. But even if you're not telling people you're on the wrong path or you made the wrong choice, they often perceive that you think that about them just because you have chosen a different standard in your life. There was a meme I saw a few weeks ago that was making this case too, where the individual felt so judged and the Christian person was like, no, like you make your own choices. That's fine. I love you. Like whatever. And the person just continued to feel judged, even though the Christian person in this little meme example hadn't said or done anything. It was just that they were abstaining from that activity. And so that other individual felt like, oh, like if you're not joining me, then you must think I'm horrible for doing this. It's just interesting. And so we follow the Prince of Peace, and it can bring us individual peace. And yet, like in the world, in D&C 135, it talks about peace being taken from the earth, which I think is more a reference to kind of geopolitical, governments and all the rest, that we're just going to have wars and rumors of wars and all these things. So I think that's a different reference to peace than even the peace that Christ talks about being able to give us, this internal inward peace that even as the world rages, we can achieve and obtain that peace. But then you've got this relational peace, I'll call it, like family members, coworkers, friends, communities, where as certain individuals make these choices, then others cannot be at peace with that. They cannot abide that. They want to separate themselves from those people because they're making different choices. And I think that's the context in which Christ is saying, I came not to send a peace, but a sword between family members, those of your own household. It's interesting that this example was tied just to family, right? And not like friends or acquaintances. It's all in the context of family, which maybe makes sense, both because the family unit was extremely strong back then, but also those are the relational bonds that are most sensitive and significant. And so when those bonds are harmed or broken because someone is frustrated with the other person about their choices pertaining to the gospel, whether they're really trying to live the gospel or they're abandoning that path, that's where it's easy to maybe deal with a friend, right? Or maybe you make a new friend, or you don't see them for a while, or you can, be copacetic with them making different choices, because that doesn't really impact you on a daily basis, or it's not so deeply ingrained with your own life. Whereas, with your family, it certainly is. And so maybe that's why Christ was focusing here on the family context, that he's like, these teachings, if applied, this is how I'm reading those verses, that he's almost saying that these teachings, if applied, are going to create contention. That even if all of you claim to agree with me, pretending to be Jesus for a moment, which sounds really bizarre, but even if all of you agree with me, there will be some among you who choose to go even deeper, who choose the greater things, who are really trying to focus on the meat of the gospel and not the milk. And so by them doing that, the rest of you, even though you claim to be following me, maybe you're drawing near unto me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. And so then you have people in your family whose heart is closer, who are behaving differently, who are making different life choices. So even within that family, where they all claim to be followers of followers of Christ, there's going to be different levels of fidelity. And so even there can be contention and feelings of judgment and separation. So it's interesting, just again, this dichotomy between the Prince of Peace and he's, whipping people and sending a sword. And it's not that his words themselves have any type of contentious anything. Granted, if you're Caesar, then you've got all kinds of fighting words, because you are basically undermining the entire claim of authority of Caesar and his, satanic supporters. Again, I talk about that in Christ versus Caesar if you want to go more in depth. But I can see where Christ's words are contentious for those who have a competing claim to authority. But for everyone else, his words themselves are not contentious or anything. It's the actions that derive from those beliefs. It's the feelings of judgment or separation or, just difference of opinion, different lifestyles that arise from people who are following those different paths. And for a family that's, tightly knit or close together as different people follow different paths, that can become very disruptive and very problematic. I've seen it. I know a number of families where this happens, and it's not pleasant. It's a lot of times really sad, but I think people are just trying to do what they think is right, and it leads to differences of opinion, and some family members don't talk to one another for a long time. It can be very difficult. So yeah, it's not enough to live and let live. This isn't just for, as Trent said in the comment, this isn't a gospel of you do you. It's not a gospel of individual choice and supporting one another, in whatever we choose. It's a gospel of specific commandments where Jesus has said, if you love me, follow my commandments. And as I shared before, what I tried to do in Christ versus Caesar in the book was to say, all right, his commandments, if we were to radically follow them, not the traditions of our fathers' interpretations, not the sanitized primary answers, not these kind of superficial approach, but if we took these to their conclusion, if we really tried to implement what Christ was saying here, what would that look like? And there are some really profound implications, I think, that are derived from a life where you're trying to be very focused in living the gospel, not the superficial version, not the simplistic version, but like really, really trying to follow Christ. And for those who do or try, it can be interesting to see how family members and friends react, because you do change your behavior. You change your worldview. You change your perception and perspective on other people's choices and lifestyles and, clubs and events and media and organizations and politicians and laws and all kinds of things. And you do end up forming judgments about these things. You do come to conclusions based on a strict standard of what Jesus said. And so if we're trying to do that, if we're trying to follow his commandments, we will have observations about the world. We will come to conclusions about how other people are thinking and behaving, and they won't like that. But how can we do anything but form our opinions and our beliefs and our actions based on what we know to be true? So it's interesting. Something on my mind. I think this is a big issue that we're going to see a lot more of in the years ahead as culture continues to shift, as social attitudes and preferences and peer pressures become even more in stark conflict with gospel principles. So I think we're only going to see more of this to come. So there's the musing for the day. Hope you guys have an awesome week, and we'll catch you next week.